The campus security office was a sterile white room filled with monitoring screens and communication equipment. Captain Wansik sat behind his desk, his massive bear-like form barely fitting in the oversized chair. His brown fur was streaked with gray from years of keeping peace on a campus full of young aliens from dozens of different worlds. Teho knocked on the doorframe and entered when Wansik waved him in. "Sit down." "Son," Wansik rumbled in his deep voice, "we need to talk about what happened in Professor Veltar's class today." Teho settled into the chair across from the security captain. "Is there a problem, sir? Several of your classmates expressed concern about your reaction to our guest speaker. They said you seemed unusually interested in his demonstrations of killing techniques. They were impressive demonstrations," Teho said honestly. "Cax clearly has a lot of skill and experience." Wansik leaned back, studying the human student. "Most beings find apex hunters terrifying. You seem to find him fascinating." "I did." "Why?" Teho was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "I guess I recognized expertise when I saw it. His techniques were efficient and well adapted to different situations. From a purely technical standpoint, it was educational." "Technical standpoint?" Wansik's small ears perked forward. "You've studied combat techniques before?" "Some." Wansik pulled up Teho's file on his desk screen. "Your application says you're studying xenobiology, with a focus on predator behavior, but it doesn't mention any military background." "It doesn't mention a lot of things," Teho said quietly. The security captain's eyes narrowed. "Perhaps you'd like to fill in some of those blanks." Teho sighed. He'd known this conversation would happen eventually. "I served in the Korean Special Forces for 6 years before coming here. Counterterrorism mostly. Some deep reconnaissance," Wansik's expression sharpened. "Combat experience." "Some? How much is some?" Teho met his gaze steadily. "Enough." Meanwhile, across campus, Mi-young was having lunch with several other students in the main cafeteria. The conversation had turned to the morning's events in Professor Veltar's class. "Your boyfriend is either very brave or very crazy," said Ara, a graceful centauri with silver skin. "No sane being gets excited about watching an apex hunter demonstrate killing techniques." Mi-young set down her cup with more force than necessary. "Teho is perfectly sane. He's just curious about things other people find uncomfortable." "Curious about murder techniques?" asked Bin, a floating gaseous being whose voice echoed from his containment sphere. "That's not curiosity, Mi-young. That's something else. You don't understand humans," Mi-young replied firmly. "We're not like other species. We had to learn to fight to survive on our world. All species had to learn to survive," Ara pointed out. "That doesn't mean we get excited about watching professional killers work." Mi-young was about to respond when her communicator chimed. She glanced at the message and frowned. "I have to go. Campus security wants to see me." Elsewhere on campus, Cax had retreated to the guest quarters assigned to him. Unlike most visiting speakers, he hadn't left immediately after his presentation. Something about his interaction with the human had left him curious. He activated his personal data terminal and began researching Earth and its inhabitants. What he found made him pause. Earth was classified as a Class 12 death world, one of the most dangerous planetary environments known to galactic science. The gravity was 3 times what most civilized species considered normal. The atmosphere contained oxygen in concentrations that were toxic to many life forms. The surface was plagued by violent weather, seismic activity, and seasonal variations that would kill most beings within days. But it was the life forms that truly caught Cax's attention. Earth was populated by creatures that existed nowhere else in the galaxy. Predators that hunted in coordinated packs, venomous creatures that could kill with a single bite, plants that were toxic to the touch. Even the smallest life forms were capable of causing death through disease or poison. And humans had not just survived in this environment, they had conquered it. "Fascinating," Cax murmured, reading about human history. Wars that had lasted for decades, conflicts that had killed millions, technologies developed specifically for more efficient ways of ending life. He pulled up combat footage from various human conflicts. What he saw made even his experienced eyes widen with interest. Humans moved with a fluid adaptability that reminded him of his own species, but with a creativity that was uniquely their own. They used tools in ways that turned everyday objects into weapons. They adapted to new environments and threats with remarkable speed. Most interesting of all, they seemed to enjoy the challenge. Back in the security office, Wonsik was reviewing Taiho's military records, which had finally been declassified for the interview. Interesting reading, the security captain said. 17 successful missions behind enemy lines. Commendations for valor under fire. Expert marksman ratings with 7 different weapon systems. Taiho said nothing. It says here you specialized in close quarters combat and survival in hostile environments. Is that accurate? Yes, sir. And before your military service? Wonsik scrolled through more files. You grew up in the mountains of Korea. Your grandfather was a hunter and survival instructor. Taiho smiled slightly. He taught me to track and hunt from the time I could walk. Said it was important to understand how to live off the land. What did you hunt? Wild boar mostly, some deer. Bears when they became a problem for local villages. Wonsik paused. Bears? You hunted creatures similar to my species? Smaller than you, Taiho said diplomatically. And not as intelligent, but still dangerous and very dangerous. That's why my grandfather made sure I knew how to do it safely and efficiently. Wonsik was beginning to understand. So when you watched Cax demonstrate his techniques, you were seeing similarities to skills you already possessed. In a way, yes. The principles are the same, even if the specific methods are different. There was a knock on the door. Mi-young entered, looking worried. You wanted to see me? She asked, glancing between Wonsik and Taiho. I wanted to get another perspective on today's events, Wonsik explained. As another human, do you think Taiho's reaction to our guest speaker was unusual? Mi-young considered the question. For most species, probably. For humans? She shrugged. Not really. We're fascinated by expertise, even when it's in areas we don't necessarily approve of. It's part of how we learn and adapt. And you're not concerned about his interest in combat techniques? Should I be? Mi-young asked. Taiho has been trained to fight since he was a child. It's part of who he is. But he's also one of the gentlest people I know. Having the ability to cause harm and choosing to cause harm are very different things. Wonsik studied both humans carefully. Your species is more complex than our initial assessments indicated. Most species are, Taiho said. It just depends on how closely you look. As the interview concluded, Wonsik made a note in his files to revise the Academy's threat assessment protocols for human students. Clearly, the academic community had been thinking of Deathworld species in much too simple terms. That evening, Cax made an unusual decision. He sent a message requesting an extended stay at the Academy, officially to conduct more research on interspecies education techniques. Unofficially, he wanted to learn more about the small human who had shown such appreciation for his skills. For the first time in years, Cax was genuinely curious about someone other than his next target. It was an interesting feeling, and he found himself looking forward to exploring it further. Professor Veltar's tentacles writhed nervously as he watched his students' reactions. Half the classroom was empty now, and those who remained looked ready to bolt at any moment. Only the strange human seemed genuinely interested in what Cax had to say. Now, Cax rumbled, moving to a larger demonstration area, I will show you techniques for hunting in low-gravity environments. He activated a holographic display that showed a 3-dimensional asteroid field. With smooth movements, he began to demonstrate how to use minimal gravity to launch surprise attacks from unexpected angles. The key is momentum conservation, Cax explained as his claws traced paths through the hologram. In space, every action must be calculated. One mistake and you drift helplessly while your prey escapes. Taiho leaned forward even more, his pen moving rapidly across the paper. He was drawing diagrams of the attack angles, adding his own notes about physics and body mechanics. Fascinating, he murmured. You're using the asteroid's rotation to add spin to your approach vector. That would make you almost impossible to track. Yuki's crystal body had gone completely dim with fear. She whispered to June. Is he taking notes on how to kill people? June clicked his mandibles nervously. I think he's taking notes on how to kill people better. Cax heard the whispered conversation but kept his attention on the human. No one had ever commented on the technical aspects of his demonstrations before. Most instructors just wanted him to scare students into understanding how dangerous the galaxy could be. The rotation principle also works for escape scenarios, Cax continued, his eyes fixed on Taiho. Sometimes the hunter becomes the hunted. Of course, Taiho nodded. Conservation of angular momentum. You could use a debris field to change direction without using energy. Very smart. When the demonstration period ended, Professor Veltar called for a 20-minute break. Students scattered quickly, most heading for the exits. Yuki tried to pull Teiho away from the classroom. "Come on," she urged, her voice full of crystal chimes of worry. "Let's get some air. Maybe some food. Anything that isn't here." But Teiho shook his head. "You go ahead. I want to ask a few questions." "Questions?" June buzzed in disbelief. "Questions for the 9-foot-tall murder machine?" "He's not a machine," Teiho said, gathering his notes. "He's an expert in his field. When do you get a chance to learn from someone with that much practical experience?" His friends exchanged worried glances but left him alone. Around the classroom, other students hurried away, casting nervous looks back at Cax. Within minutes, only Teiho and the apex hunter remained. Teiho approached without any sign of fear or hesitation. Cax watched him come, trying to understand what he was seeing. The human moved with a natural balance that spoke of physical training. His eyes were alert and focused. Most importantly, his heart rate hadn't increased at all during the entire demonstration. "I have some questions about your joint lock variations," Teiho said, stopping just outside what most beings would consider Cax's strike range. "Specifically the one where you use the opponent's own arm as a lever." Cax blinked slowly. "You wish to know about killing techniques?" "I wish to know about efficient techniques," Teiho corrected. "The way you used minimal force to achieve maximum effect was impressive. Most beings would just use brute strength." "Brute strength is wasteful," Cax agreed. "It also leaves you tired if you face multiple opponents." "Exactly." Teiho's grin widened. "Energy conservation is crucial in any prolonged conflict. Show me that wrist manipulation again." For the next 10 minutes, Cax found himself giving a private demonstration to an audience of one. The human asked intelligent questions about leverage, anatomy, and physics. He seemed to understand instinctively how each technique could be modified for different body types and situations. "Your species," Cax said finally. "They are warriors?" Teiho considered the question. "Some of us. We've had a lot of practice over the years." "Practice? Humans have been fighting each other and our environment for our entire history. We had to get good at it or we wouldn't have survived." Cax felt something shift in his understanding. "Your world is dangerous?" "Very," Teiho said simply. "Almost everything on Earth can kill you if you're not careful. The weather, the animals, the plants, even the ground itself sometimes." "Interesting." Cax studied the human with new eyes. "And yet your species survived to reach the stars." "We did more than survive," Teiho said. "We learned to thrive. Humans are very good at adapting to hostile environments." When Professor Veltar returned, he found them discussing the finer points of predator behavior in different gravity wells. Several other students had come back for the second half of class, but they clustered near the exits ready to run. "Most unsettling," Veltar muttered to himself, watching Teiho and Cax compare notes. "Most unsettling indeed." The rest of the class continued with Cax demonstrating hunting techniques used in various atmospheric conditions. Teiho continued taking detailed notes and asking thoughtful questions. By the end, even Cax seemed more relaxed, clearly enjoying having an interested audience for once. As students filed out after class, several stopped to speak with Professor Veltar. Yuki's voice chimed with worry as she approached the instructor's desk. "Professor, I'm concerned about Teiho's behavior. He seemed very interested in the violent demonstrations." "Unnaturally interested," June added, his compound eyes reflecting genuine concern. He was taking notes on killing techniques. Other students nodded in agreement. A tall Arcturian with blue skin spoke up. The human showed no fear response at all. "That's not normal behavior for a civilized being." Professor Veltar's eye stalk swiveled to watch Teiho leaving the classroom. The human was still talking animatedly with Cax, apparently discussing something about pressure points in different skeletal structures. "Perhaps," Veltar said slowly, "we should inform campus security about this situation. Better to be cautious." Meanwhile, Cax was experiencing something entirely new. For the first time in his adult life, he had met someone who looked at his abilities without horror or disgust. The human seemed to understand that killing was an art form requiring skill, planning, and intelligence. "Your people," Cax said as they walked down the corridor. "They would find my abilities useful?" Teiho shrugged. "Some would. Others would be horrified. Humans are complicated that way. We can appreciate skill even when we don't approve of how it's used. And you? Do you approve? Tejo thought about it seriously. I think you're a master of your craft. Whether I approve would depend on how you choose to use that mastery. Cax stopped walking. In his entire life, no one had ever suggested that he had choices in how to use his abilities. He was an apex hunter. He hunted, he killed. That was what his kind did. You suggest I could choose not to hunt? I suggest you could choose what to hunt, Tejo replied. And when, and why. As they parted ways outside the building, Cax found himself with much to think about. The small human had given him a new perspective on his own nature. For the first time, he wondered if there might be more to existence than simply being the perfect killer his species had bred him to be. Tejo, meanwhile, headed toward his next class with a spring in his step. He'd learned more about efficient combat techniques in 2 hours than most beings learned in a lifetime. It had been a very good day. The morning sun cast long shadows across the crystal halls of Kepler Academy. Students from dozens of worlds hurried to their classes, their varied forms creating a rainbow of colors and shapes. Some floated, others walked on multiple legs, and a few simply glided through the air. Tejo pushed through the crowd with steady steps. His black hair was messy from running late, and his worn backpack bounced against his shoulders. Other students gave him curious looks. Humans were still rare at the academy, and most aliens had never seen one up close. Tejo, wait up, called a voice like tinkling glass. He turned to see Yuki hurrying toward him. Her crystal body caught the light and threw tiny rainbows on the walls. She was from Etheria, a peaceful world where beings like her spent centuries in quiet thought. You're going to be late for Professor Veltar's class again? She said, her voice worried. I know, Tejo grinned, but I couldn't skip breakfast. Earth food is hard to find here. Behind Yuki came June, clicking his way forward on 6 insect-like legs. His large compound eyes glittered with amusement. The human and his eating habits, he buzzed in his musical voice. You eat more than a Vorthan warrior. That's because I need the energy, Tejo laughed. Come on, let's get to class before Veltar decides to fail us all. The 3 friends rushed down the corridor toward the xenobiology department. The walls here were covered with pictures of creatures from across the galaxy. Most students found the images disturbing. Tejo had always thought they were fascinating. They slipped into the classroom just as Professor Veltar was arranging his tentacles around his teaching podium. The molluscan professor's eye stalk swiveled to look at them with disapproval. How kind of you to join us, Veltar said in his wet, sliding voice. Please take your seats. Today we have a very special guest. Tejo found his usual spot in the middle row. Around him, students from 20 different worlds settled into seats designed for their various body types. The gaseous beings floated in special containers. The rock-like Petrarians sat on reinforced chairs. Everyone seemed excited about the guest speaker. Today, Professor Veltar announced, we will learn about practical predation techniques. Our guest comes from the Crimson Nebula, where survival means perfection in the art of hunting. A murmur ran through the classroom. The Crimson Nebula was known throughout the galaxy as a place where only the strongest survived. Most civilized worlds had no contact with that region of space. Please welcome Cax of the Apex Hunter clan. The classroom door slid open. What walked through was a nightmare made flesh. Cax stood nearly 9 feet tall. His body was covered in midnight black scales that seemed to absorb light. His arms ended in claws that looked sharp enough to cut through steel. His head was elongated, with a mouth full of teeth designed for tearing flesh. But it was his eyes that made students gasp in terror. They were the color of fresh blood, and they held the cold intelligence of a perfect killer. Around Tejo, students pressed back in their seats. Some whimpered. Others closed their eyes. A few simply fainted. The Etherian student behind him began to glow with fear light. Even Yuki's usual crystal brightness dimmed to almost nothing. June's legs clicked nervously against the floor. By the hive mind, he whispered, that's an actual apex hunter. But Tejo leaned forward in his seat. His eyes lit up with interest and a wide grin spread across his face. He looked like a child who had just been given the best present of his life. Cax's predator senses immediately picked up on the different responses around the room. Fear, terror, disgust. These were the usual reactions to his presence. But there was something else. Something that made his nostrils flare with interest. Excitement. Genuine, curious excitement. His blood-red eyes scanned the classroom until they found the source, a small creature with pale skin and dark hair. It was looking at him with the kind of expression most beings reserved for beautiful art or beloved friends. "Thank you, Professor Veltar," Cax said, his voice like gravel grinding against stone. "I am honored to share my knowledge with your students." He moved to the front of the classroom with fluid grace. Every step was perfectly balanced, ready to spring into deadly action at a moment's notice. His claws clicked softly against the floor. "I am Cax, last survivor of the Shadow Moon Pack. I have taken the lives of over 300 sentient beings in honorable combat. Today I will teach you about the art of the hunt." Several students got up and left the room. Professor Veltar did nothing to stop them. Even he looked uncomfortable with his guest's introduction. But Tejo pulled out his notebook and pen. He wrote down every word, his grin never fading. "The first rule of hunting," Cax continued, "is to know your prey better than it knows itself. Every creature has weaknesses. Every being has patterns. A true hunter studies these until they become obvious." As he spoke, Cax demonstrated on a practice dummy. His movements were so fast they were hard to follow. His claws found weak points in armor with surgical precision. When he struck, it was with exactly the right amount of force, no more, no less. "Efficient," Tejo whispered to himself, still scribbling notes. Yuki stared at him in shock. "Efficient," she hissed. "That thing just showed us 17 ways to kill someone." 23, actually, Tejo corrected without looking up from his notes. He used some variations in the joint attacks. June's compound eyes focused on his human friend with new concern. "Tejo, you're starting to worry me." But Tejo was too fascinated to pay attention to his friend's concerns. He watched Cax demonstrate hunting techniques that had been perfected over thousands of years. Each movement had purpose. Each attack served multiple functions. It was like watching a deadly dance performed by a master artist. Cax found himself glancing repeatedly at the small human in the middle row. The creature's obvious interest was unlike anything he had experienced. Most beings either fled from him or tried to hide their fear. This one seemed to be genuinely enjoying the demonstration. When the class ended, students hurried toward the exits. But Tejo remained in his seat, still writing in his notebook. He looked up as Cax approached. "Interesting lecture," Tejo said with that same bright grin. "I've never seen joint manipulation used quite that way." "Very creative." Cax tilted his massive head. "You are not afraid, should I be?" Tejo asked, genuinely curious. "Most creatures find my presence disturbing." Tejo shrugged. "I find it educational. You've clearly spent a lot of time perfecting your techniques. That kind of dedication is admirable." For the first time in his long life, Cax didn't know how to respond to such a reaction. He studied the human with new interest, wondering what kind of creature could look at a perfect killer and see something worth admiring. 3 days after Cax's guest lecture, Tejo received an unexpected message on his personal communicator. The text was brief and direct. "Combat Simulation Chamber. Level 5. Tonight at 2000 hours. Come alone." Cax Tejo stared at the message for a long moment. Most beings would have deleted it and reported it to security. Instead, he found himself curious about what the Apex Hunter wanted to discuss in private. The Combat Simulation Chamber was located in the Academy's athletic complex. It was typically used by military science students to practice tactical scenarios in safe, holographic environments. At 8 in the evening, the complex was nearly deserted. Tejo found Cax standing in the center of the large circular room. The alien's massive form was perfectly still, but his red eyes tracked every movement as the human entered. "You came," Cax observed. "You asked?" Tejo replied simply. "Most beings would have informed security about this meeting." Tejo shrugged. "Most beings didn't spend 2 hours listening to you explain hunting techniques. I figured if you wanted to hurt me, you would have done it already." Cax tilted his head, studying the human. "You trust easily." "I observe carefully," Tejo corrected. "Your body language in class showed no aggressive intent toward me specifically. You were demonstrating, not threatening. And now?" Tejo looked around the simulation chamber. "Now you're curious about something. Probably the same thing I'm curious about. Which is, whether humans really are as interesting as your research suggests we are." Cax's eyes widened slightly. "You know I've been researching your species?" "Academy computer systems log all data access," Tejo said with a small smile. "You've been reading about Earth for the past 3 days. I'm flattered by the attention. Your world is remarkable, Cax admitted. A Class 12 death world that produced a species capable of interstellar travel. Most creatures from such environments never develop beyond basic tool use. Most death worlds don't have the right combination of challenges and opportunities, Tejo explained. Earth was dangerous enough to make us tough, but not so dangerous that we couldn't develop technology to overcome the dangers. Cax activated the simulation system with a gesture. The room transformed into a realistic forest environment, complete with trees, undergrowth, and the sounds of wildlife. Show me, Cax said. Show you what? How a human hunts. Tejo looked around the simulated forest. It was similar to the mountains where he'd grown up, though the trees were slightly wrong and the sounds didn't quite match Earth wildlife. This isn't really my environment, he said. But I can adapt, the simulation began. Holographic prey animals appeared throughout the forest, deer-like creatures that moved with realistic behavior patterns. Tejo studied them for several minutes, noting their movement patterns and feeding habits. Patience, he murmured to himself, something his grandfather had taught him long ago. Cax watched as the human moved through the forest with surprising stealth. Unlike the apex hunter's fluid predatory grace, Tejo's movement was different, more deliberate, more thoughtful. He used the terrain to his advantage, staying downwind and using natural cover. When Tejo finally made his move, it was with tools improvised from the environment. He used a fallen branch as a spear, modified with a sharp stone attached using vine. His throw was accurate and clean. The simulated deer died instantly. Interesting technique, Cax commented as the simulation reset. Tool use combined with environmental adaptation. Humans aren't natural predators like your species, Tejo explained. We don't have claws or natural weapons. We had to get creative. Show me combat techniques. The simulation changed to an urban environment, a maze of buildings and alleyways. Hostile figures began appearing armed with various weapons. Tejo's entire demeanor shifted. His relaxed posture became alert and focused. His eyes scanned constantly for threats and opportunities. What followed was a demonstration that impressed even Cax's experienced judgment. Tejo moved through the urban landscape like water flowing around obstacles. He used every element of the environment as either a weapon or a shield. A loose piece of rebar became a striking weapon. A broken bottle became a cutting tool. Even the architecture itself was used tactically. Stairs for elevation advantage, narrow passages to limit enemy movement. But what struck Cax most was the efficiency. Like his own species, humans seemed to understand that wasted motion meant death. Every movement served a purpose. Every action was calculated for maximum effect with minimum risk. Your grandfather taught you this? Cax asked as the simulation ended. The basics. The military taught me the rest. Tejo wiped sweat from his forehead. Though most of what you just saw was improvisation, humans are good at that. Adaptation under pressure, a valuable survival trait, essential in our case. Earth throws a lot of unexpected challenges at you. The creatures that couldn't adapt didn't survive long enough to reproduce. Cax was quiet for a long moment, processing what he'd witnessed. I was sent here to evaluate whether humans pose a threat to galactic peace. Tejo wasn't surprised. And what's your conclusion? Your species is dangerous, Cax said bluntly. Perhaps more dangerous than mine in some ways. We are bred for killing, but you have learned to kill through necessity and innovation. You combine lethal capability with unpredictable creativity. But Tejo sensed there was more. But you also demonstrate something my species lacks. Choice. Cax's red eyes fixed on the human. I kill because it is what I am. You kill because you choose to when you choose to. That's the difference between a weapon and a warrior, Tejo said. A weapon has no choice in how it's used. A warrior decides when and why to fight. And this is why you are not afraid of me in class. You recognized a fellow warrior. I recognized someone who understood the responsibility that comes with the ability to cause harm. Cax considered this. In my culture, strength is measured by how efficiently one can end life. In yours, strength is measured by how many lives you choose to preserve rather than take. Tejo paused. Though we're also pretty good at the other thing when we need to be. A philosophy of controlled lethality. A philosophy of controlled everything. Humans learned a long time ago that our biggest threat wasn't the dangerous animals or hostile environment of Earth. It was other humans. So we developed systems, laws, morals, social structures, to control our own destructive impulses. Cax found this concept fascinating. Self-imposed limitations on natural abilities. Self-imposed purposes for natural abilities, Tejo corrected. We channel our capacity for violence into protection of things we value. Family, community, ideals. Unknown to both of them, their conversation was being monitored. June had followed Tejo to the athletic complex, worried about his friend's safety. He now crouched outside the simulation chamber, his compound eyes wide with amazement as he listened to the exchange. The insectoid student had expected to witness either a brutal attack or a disturbing bonding between two killers. Instead, he was hearing a philosophical discussion about the nature of strength and the responsibility that came with power. When Tejo and Cax finally parted company an hour later, both had gained a new understanding. Cax had learned that not all dangerous species were mindlessly violent. Some had evolved complex ways of controlling their lethal capabilities while still maintaining them for necessary purposes. Tejo had learned that even the most efficient killers in the galaxy could question their purpose and seek something beyond mere survival. As June scurried back to his dormitory, he realized that the galaxy's understanding of both species would need to be completely revised. Humans weren't dangerous because they were savage. They were dangerous because they were thoughtful. And apex hunters weren't monsters. They were warriors without a war to fight. The implications of that realization would change everything. The field trip to Research Station Omega had been planned for months. Located on Kepler Academy's moon, the station was where advanced students conducted zero-gravity experiments and studied the effects of vacuum on various life forms. It was considered one of the safest academic environments in the system. Mi Young stood at the observation deck's massive window, watching the Academy's main campus rotate slowly below them. The artificial gravity on the station was set to half of standard, making movement feel light and bouncy. "It's beautiful up here," she said to Yuki, who was floating nearby in a specialized harness designed for her crystalline body type. "I prefer solid ground," Yuki replied, her voice creating tiny chimes of nervousness. "All this open space makes me uncomfortable." June clicked his way across the deck on magnetic footpads, his compound eyes reflecting the starlight streaming through the windows. "At least the view is worth the trip. Look at those nebula formations." Around them, nearly 200 students from various species were scattered throughout the research station, conducting experiments or simply enjoying the unique environment. Professor Veltar was leading a group through the biology labs, while other instructors supervised activities in the physics and chemistry sections. Wansik patrolled the station with 2 junior security officers, though his presence was largely ceremonial. Research Station Omega was in neutral space, protected by multiple layers of security systems and early warning sensors. Nothing dangerous had ever happened there. Tejo was in the engineering section with Cax, discussing the station's artificial gravity generators. Their unusual friendship had become accepted around campus, though it still made some students nervous. "The gravity field generators use rotating plasma fields," Tejo explained, pointing to a technical diagram. "It's more stable than traditional centrifugal systems, but requires more power." Cax studied the design with interest. "What happens if the power fails?" "Emergency backup systems kick in. If those fail too, everyone goes weightless until they can restore power or evacuate to the main campus." "Evacuation procedures?" Tejo showed him the emergency protocols posted on the wall. "Standard shuttle runs can evacuate about 50 beings per trip. In a real emergency, they pack more in, but it's not comfortable." Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden change in the lighting. The normal white illumination flickered and was replaced by the red glow of emergency systems. "Attention all station personnel," came an announcement over the intercom. "This is not a drill. We are detecting multiple unidentified ships approaching the station. All students and faculty report to designated emergency assembly areas immediately." Through the observation windows, they could see sleek, dark ships dropping out of hyperspace around the station. The vessels were clearly military in design, bristling with weapons and painted in the matte black of deep space raiders. "Pirates," Cax growled, his predatory instincts immediately activated. "Ravager-class ships, military-grade but operating outside legal authority." Tejo counted at least 8 ships surrounding the station. They picked their target well. Academic facility, minimal security, valuable research equipment. The first explosions came from the direction of the security offices. The pirates were moving fast, taking out the station's defensive capabilities before anyone could mount organized resistance. Students screamed and scattered as armed figures in combat armor began boarding the station through emergency airlocks. The attackers moved with professional efficiency, herding students and faculty into central areas where they could be easily controlled. Wansik's voice echoed through the corridors as he tried to organize resistance, but it was clear the security forces were outgunned and overwhelmed. The sound of weapons fire grew closer. They're not just here for equipment, Tejo realized, watching the pirates' systematic approach. They're taking hostages, probably planning to ransom students back to their home governments. Mi-young, Yuki and June found themselves pushed along with dozens of other students toward the main assembly hall. Pirates in powered armor shouted orders in various languages, their weapons clearly set to lethal settings. One student, a young Arcturian, tried to break away from the group. A pirate's energy weapon dropped him instantly, his blue blood spreading across the station's white floor. The message was clear: cooperation or death. Stay calm, Mi-young whispered to her friends. Don't give them any reason to hurt you. Yuki's crystal body had gone completely transparent with fear. June's legs clicked nervously against the floor as they were herded into the assembly hall with nearly 100 other hostages. The pirate leader, a scarred Vorthon with cybernetic implants replacing half his face, activated the station's communication system. Attention academic authorities, he broadcast. This is Captain Rex of the Crimson Blade Mercenary Company. We now control Research Station Omega and hold approximately 200 hostages. You will transfer 50 million credits to our specified accounts within 12 hours, or we begin executing prisoners. In the engineering section, Tejo and Cax found themselves cut off from the main group. The pirates had secured the central areas first, leaving the outer sections to be cleared systematically. We need to reach the others, Tejo said, checking the station's schematic on a nearby terminal. The hostages are being held in the main assembly hall, Cax observed, heavily guarded. Direct approach would be suicide. Then we don't use a direct approach. Tejo pulled up the station's maintenance systems. These pirates are used to dealing with civilian targets. They've secured the obvious routes but ignored the infrastructure. Cax studied the schematics. Maintenance tunnels, ventilation systems, power conduits. Exactly. We can move through the station's support structure without being detected. And then? Tejo's expression hardened in a way that reminded Cax of their time in the combat simulator. Then we remind these pirates why attacking Deathworlders is a bad idea. Meanwhile, Wansik was barricaded in an auxiliary security station with one wounded officer. His communication equipment was damaged, but he could still monitor the pirates' movements through the station's internal sensors. He watched in amazement as two figures began moving through areas the pirates thought were secure. One was clearly Cax. The Apex Hunter's distinctive form was unmistakable even on the grainy security feeds. The other had to be Tejo. What are they doing? The wounded officer asked. Wansik studied their movements with growing understanding. They're hunting. The pirates had made a critical error in their assessment. They had treated the research station like any other soft target, full of helpless academics who would surrender quickly when threatened. They hadn't counted on two apex predators deciding to fight back. In the assembly hall, Mi-young was using her diplomatic training to try to keep the hostages calm. She moved quietly among the frightened students, offering reassurance and preventing panic that might provoke the guards. Help is coming, she whispered to a group of terrified first-year students. Stay quiet and don't do anything to attract attention. One of the pirates noticed her movement and shouted at her to sit down. Mi-young complied immediately, but not before catching sight of a maintenance panel near the floor that seemed slightly loose. Someone was moving through the station's hidden passages, and she had a pretty good idea who it might be. Outside in the corridors, Tejo and Cax were beginning their rescue operation. Two natural predators, working together, against opponents who had no idea what they were really facing. The pirates were about to learn a hard lesson about the difference between helpless prey and sleeping predators.